Hello, everyone. I'm glad you could be here. I'm here talking today to Jess Levine about a project that's on Kickstarter now, Galactic and Going Rogue. We're going to dig into that soon, but before I get there, can I ask you to introduce yourself and what brought you into this weird, strange world of creating RPGs?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I am Jess Levine. I am a game designer, science fiction author, organizer, a few other things, but those are the big ones. And what got me into making RPGs? Hilariously, I would say Going Rogue got me into making RPGs. So I had been long time life like I've been playing RPGs since high school. I played like 6 years of D&D 3.5, some Shadowrun. Then I played Avery Alder's The Quiet Year and never played D&D again. Just like exploded open my idea of what games were. And then during early COVID lockdowns, um, everyone had their coping mechanism. Some people made like sourdough bread. Me and a few friends played Riley's game Galactic, and we were obsessed. We wrote 150,000 words of short fiction about our characters outside of sessions. Um, and yeah, it was just like our whole lives. We were in the Discord constantly. And then when Riley released second edition, Galactic 2E, which was also in part because of our game. Like we told Riley we were playing, and Riley's like, "That's so exciting! I've wanted to make a second edition. Can you play test it?" And I was like, "Yeah, we'd love to." And so when second edition releases, Riley hosts a game jam, G2E jam, and there was 2 months to make some sort of like expansion or hack or whatever. And I'm like, I love Galactic as a system, but I also, my favorite Star Wars movie is Rogue One. For all its problems, I still love it very dearly. And I was like, Galactic is good at telling stories of charming heroes, but it is not good at telling stories of like troubled martyrs who are in this very like tense conflict with each other in this intense internal conflict. Um, and so I was like, what if I took Galactic as a system and made it tell a sort of more Rogue One esque story? And I made First edition of Going Rogue was my first ever game. It was originally framed a little more as an expansion, though I discovered like the playbooks in it aren't compatible with the playbooks in Galactic. I can talk about that more later. I don't think anyone played Galactic 1E, or sorry, I don't think anyone played Going Rogue 1E who wasn't seated at my kitchen table to play it with me. No one heard of that game. But a little bit later, I did my two-player dueling game about like pre-battle banter. I have the high ground, and I crowdfunded that, and it did moderately well. And so after, I was like, let's revisit Going Rogue now that I know what I'm doing and make it a little better. Um,
Important step, yeah.
yeah, learning to game. I tell like prospective game designers or people who are just getting started so often, you can re-release your game. You can do it as many times as you want. This is the third time I'm doing it for Going Rogue. And it's great because then you have an existing audience because you know what you're doing with it more and can put more work into it. And like get your games to the table as fast as possible, play test them as fast as possible, and then release them as fast as possible, especially if you're a new designer, because it'll teach you so much. And then when you're better, re-release them. Don't be precious. Don't hide it away your fantasy heartbreaker for 5 years. Get it out in the world. Um, but
It's
yeah,
nothing else, and this is something I also talk to independent creators about. Doing things is more important than not doing things. And it doesn't matter how good your ideas or your random Google Doc is. The steps between success and failure are taking the time to sit down. You've got to edit it. You've got to email that artist guy back. You've got to figure out what the font is. And if you can just do those painful, boring things, that will mean releasing a game.
yes, you're 100% right on that.
And I do want to talk more about the themes and the inspiration, especially about the spectrum of people you meet when you are doing advocacy and organizing. But first, let me get a little bit more into the nuts and bolts of what your game is and how it works. So it is something that you can run without a GM, which on its own is an interesting idea. The Quiet Year is one of the games that can work with that. You've also got Fiasco, there are a few others, but how is it implemented specifically with your work?
Yeah. We actually have Fiasco's Jason Morningstar working on the project for the crowdfunder, which is exciting. But um, the The system for Going Rogue is based on, and the system for Galactic is based on an engine by another developer, Avery Alder, who has also made The Quiet Year. So Avery Alder and Benjamin Rosenbaum together did a game called Dream Askew, Dream Apart. Dream Askew is being like queer people on the edge of a society falling apart, and Dream Apart is being Jews in the shtetl on the edge of the Russian Empire. And they realized it was very similar games because it was a boast about an outcast, marginalized group on the edge of society. They made that GM-less system for those games called Belonging Outside Belonging. The most famous Belonging Outside Belonging game is actually probably Wanderhome by Jay Dragon. And they use the same core engine that Galactic and Going Rogue use. And the way that those games work is that, like, you have a playbook that represents a sort of archetypal character. And then in order to introduce conflict, you have vulnerable moves. Those are moves that make your character look bad or get them in trouble. It presents them problems that are like thematic to your character. And so the spy playbook might go into a compromising situation with no plan for backup, or the leverage character might get captured as a vulnerable move, or they can be very deeply interpersonal. So it can be like a state a blunt truth someone doesn't want to hear, etc. And when you do that, you get a token. And I like to talk about tokens as like narrative agency. You get that, and then you can use it later to influence the story. And to me, making vulnerable moves is the most fun part of the type of systems like these. I love making my character look bad and look messy. And so you do that and you signal to the table, in this GM-less game we're telling, where you all and myself are controlling the setting, when I take that token, I'm saying, mess my character up, make me look bad. Like, that's what I'm inviting you to do. And then on the flip side, you can spend that token to make a strong move. And it's something that your character is very good at that solves a problem. And you are, when you do that strong move, telling the table, play to my character's strengths, make them look really good right now. And it helps you communicate, what story are we trying to tell? And that's the core mechanic that a lot of things are based on. Riley made a really interesting innovation to this system where Belonging Outside Belonging has setting elements. They represent like big parts of the world, so that's how you play GMless. Those big parts of the world are played by different people. So in the original systems, it's like the society intact, the roving gangs. Each of those is a setting element that someone plays that part of the world and those NPCs. In Galactic and Going Rogue, it's the Liberation and the Mandate, who you might be familiar with from its touchstone inspirations as like a revolutionary force and a fascist force. The Space Between, that is mystical and links all things together, the Scum and Villainy, etc. Riley did something really interesting and gave those setting elements, or as she calls them, pillars, moves. So they also take tokens and give tokens. When they like foreshadow things, they gain one. And when they interfere with characters, they give one to that character, and as do NPCs. At a high level, those are the main mechanics. Going Rogue also adds its own innovation on top, which is that spoilers for the movie start Rogue One here, but I think that's fine. Everybody dies at the end of that movie. And in Going Rogue, you know from the beginning that all of your characters are going to die at the end. Your characters don't know that, but you do. And you play in the dramatic irony of figuring out why all of your characters are going to become willing to sacrifice themselves for the cause voluntarily in a way that is narratively guaranteed will have been worth it, will have in a major way moved the galaxy closer to freedom. And so you start out as these characters who tend to be like cynics and loners and people who don't want to work together. And you play to find out, why do we become willing to do that thing, knowing that it is always coming?
It was particularly interesting, just doing the basic research for the game and how it works and how you were talking about it. Is two of the first themes that you mentioned are cynicism and hope, which people might think are opposed but actually aren't, especially when you're getting into um, the work of generations long advocacy and improvement of society. You know, and I've talked to people who were talking about their parents and their grandparents during segregation times. You would know a problem would not be solved while you were still alive. Trying to solve the problem may even get you killed, but that's living, that's humanity. If you care about anyone other than yourself, if you care about the fate of the future, then you know that the only effective way to get things done is to recognize that they are problems and solutions bigger than you as an individual.
Absolutely, there are. As a Marxist Antonio Gramsci says, uh, pessimism of the intellect, optimism of the will. You have to be able to be pessimistic about certain outcomes that realistically are, and you have to be able to be optimistic anyway about the idea that we can do this. And you have to hold those simultaneously, which is very difficult. And hope and cynicisms are both tools for that in certain ways.
And and the fact is, I mean, I am a very dour person. I'm a lawyer who works in organizing for creating more housing and anti-corruption efforts. Um, there are a lot of things that people can do. It just like creating a game, it requires doing things. You have to do
Yes.
things, and you have to do things that are sometimes tedious and boring, like looking through a city council agenda to find out what they're doing.
And sometimes that feel fundamentally unrewarding because measuring the impact of our success, especially when, to quote another Marxist, Walter Benjamin, the enemy has not ceased to be victorious. We have not fully changed the thing yet. Um, it's hard to know. I put in all this effort. I do all this tedious work or dangerous work or whatever. Was it worth it? And that was an emotion I was really grappling with when I started working on Growing Rogue. If that's something you'd want me to jump off onto.
Yeah, yeah. I'm how is it what was the timeline of inspiration between organizing and creating the game? Did they feed into each other over time?
Significantly, though, I would say a lot of it was sort of in post, which is to say, I really cut my teeth on real political organizing during the first Trump administration. There are limits to the ways that I can talk about this for obvious legal reasons, but I was a participant in street anti fascist action during the first Trump administration. Um, and that can be somewhat dangerous work and pretty risky work. And I had sort of been doing that for 4 years, and then also the like George Floyd insurrections happened, and I was in Philadelphia. There were very, very violent and dangerous like cops at protests during that series of uprisings. And Going Rogue, I was working on in 2021, and that was about a year after the George Floyd uprisings. It was after these 4 years of the Trump era and then everything changing in the early Biden era. And I was just processing a lot of feelings of, did anything we did make a difference? Like, I know that we at one point got a fascist rally shut down that was happening in Philly, though the way that happened was in and of itself complicated. But did that actually hamper their movement? How much did that matter? What did we do? And there's more other examples that I can't talk about, but it's I was just really deep in. I've spent my past 4 years really deep in this work, and I don't know. I can't measure what we did. And there was also a lot of internal conflict. I began that work as an anarchist. I ended that work as a communist, and moved from like one organization to another. Well, loosely, more than one. Um, and I was also watching all of this conflict internally between these different groups, like in between the movement, just being absolutely vicious to each other, and then even within groups, these different priorities and different perspectives. And so I was also struggling with like, how do we navigate that balance, and what does that mean, and how do we tolerate how difficult that is and live through it and keep working together? And so I would say Going Rogue was written sort of in the aftermath of things are calming down in the Biden administration. That doesn't mean things are good. The Biden administration was terrible, but there was not the same street fascist presence. There was not the sort of same ascendant right wing movement that my work had been focused on responding to. And so I was kind of like taking a breath and going, what was that? And also finding myself a little cynical on the other side. And I can say how that manifests in the game, but to answer your question, that was the situation I was in as I was starting to write.
Something that happens in Andor, which is an inspiration for this, and in real life, and is then pulled into the game, is the fact that you do have infinite infighting within groups that have a predefined enemy, whether it is the Mandate or the Empire or something else. Sometimes those arguments are trivial and sometimes they aren't, because people will have a lot of disagreements about what is worth fighting for. You have limited political capital, limited time and resources, but also you will have people who disagree about specifics of what you're doing. But it is still surprising to see how much a group of people who ostensibly want the same thing will spend efforts to fight one another instead of trying to achieve that thing.
Yes, human separatists, or sorry, human supremacists, separatists. They're all lost, as Saw Gerrera would say. It's very exhausting and frustrating work. And I watched multiple organizations schism. I watched uh, completely different organizations actively undercut each other's work, and like write 10-page manifestos calling the others cops, or book a hall out from under them so they could like steal the audience of an event. And something I do in the game, there are pillars, those setting elements that Going Rogue adds. It splits the liberation into the Parliament and the intelligence. And the Parliament are the people trying to be responsible to a democratic process, to the people at large, who are trying to uphold the ideals that are important to the liberation, that who are believe that sometimes having that ideological discussion is important, and being able to be proud of what we do in order to build a public support for this movement is important. And then on the other hand, there's the intelligence, and those are the like spies. This is Luthen, this is Cassian in the movie in Rogue One, who are burdened people trying to do whatever it takes to win an uphill battle, and who want less oversight, who want to be able to act more decisively without answering to anybody because they think it's more effective, who want to be willing to do things that are maybe a little ethically gray because they think that's what it takes to get there. And these are two forces set up in tension in the book. They're reflected in Rogue One and in Andor and in real life, but I'm setting them up in tension in the book. And I really try to frame in their descriptions, neither of these are the bad guy, and neither of them are perfectly the good guy either. What these are two parts that must be present in any liberation movement. And if they get unbalanced, if they get out of hand, if either one, if we get too cautious and conciliatory and slow, or if we aren't accountable, we aren't democratic in a way that actually distinguishes us from what we are trying to overcome, either of those getting out of hand prevents us from being successful. And so something Going Rogue is trying to do is to encourage players to reflect, to look at these issues from both perspectives, because it's GMless. You inhabit both roles. You inhabit the Parliament and the intelligence. You are both at once. And Going Rogue was written, as I said, because I was processing a lot of these feelings. And something that I have come to understand about what I was going for in its design was that Going Rogue is a mirror. It is not trying to convince someone to go out and organize. I don't think games really can't do that. It's not really trying to educate. It is not really trying to teach someone how to do this. Again, it's not suited to that task, and I don't think most TTRPGs are. What it is trying to do is be a mirror for people who are already involved in this work, who are already organizers, and who are struggling emotionally with, how do I feel about these things, and how do I move through them? Because that's where I was when I wrote it. And it's meant to be a way to look at some of these ideas separate from when they have real stakes, and to look at your own reaction to them and figure out, what do I feel? What do I think? What do I need?
It's particularly interesting to hear that because when I was initially reading about the game, I was thinking it's strange that there isn't a GM. Wouldn't be that be the perfect way to create an antagonistic force that you are fighting against? But you're right. When you're doing activism, there's a lot of empathy you need when you're looking at a policy and you know how it functions and what it does, and you know that it's bad or good. And then you've got to think, why are my allies and enemies pushing for this on the way that they are? Some you need to understand how people think to effectively convince them or circumvent their authority or whatever it is you're trying to do, um, which takes doing the Ender Wiggins thing, putting yourself in their place, understanding where they're coming from, even if they are wrong, and they very often are, or at least understanding if they disagree with you, it may not be for the reason that you initially thought it was.
Yeah. And also, both of those forces exist within ourselves, both of those tendencies, both of those uh, desires. And so it's also by putting you in both perspectives, allowing you to get in touch with different parts of yourself.
It's
Um,
surprising as an emotional experience. People might think that they don't have that capacity to hold two radically different ideas and personas and emotions in their mind at once, but all you do is you create an RPG or you say, here's an index card that says go left, here's an index card that says go right. You are both people. And then they'll start to get it. It
that
doesn't
is
sound right. I know I sound crazy to people who haven't done this, but like if you create an RPG character not by something you've sat down and done, decided you want to do, but roll some random dice and then seeing where it leads you, you will really start to get into the mindset of whatever you're doing, just because that's how your brain processes things. If you pretend long enough, you will feel it.
that is in many ways the crux of my hope. And whether I got there is its own question, but like it was something I was trying to do. Specifically, the sacrifice fate. I think of it that like mechanic that makes it so that you are narratively guaranteed to sacrifice yourself for the cause at the end. I've had interesting discussions about is that hopeful? And for me, it fundamentally really is because becoming willing to sacrifice yourself in that way requires a degree of certainty that the thing you are doing matters. And we don't almost ever get that certainty in real life. Um, and there are places and times in history where that is actually a more present thing, a more real thing to people. And I think I'd be remiss not to think about when we talk about martyrs, to talk about Palestine, to talk about the people where that is a daily reality. But for the majority of my audience, it is not a reality that you're going to probably have a moment that is so worth it. You give up your life. But I want players to experience that moment vicariously through their characters so that they can have that emotion of certainty, of knowing I'm going to give everything and it's going to be worth it because we are going to make a difference, and hope that they can experience a little bleed from their character to them. Like you said, like you pretend long enough and you feel it, and that hopefully they can take that feeling with them as catharsis in real life when they don't actually get to have that certainty. And it's I have lots of questions politically about my own work, just in terms of like, well, actually, is that demobilizing? Am I giving people that feeling and then they don't have to go get it elsewhere? And I don't know. I've never actually confidently come down on that question, but I think for me, it did give me something I needed of let's feel that here. And then maybe when I'm trying to do the pessimism of the intellect, optimism of the will, I can remember what that felt like and go, this is worth trying.
It's a fun coincidence that we get the timeline of Andor backwards. We know the Death Star will be destroyed in the first Star Wars material. We see Cassian Andor get utterly obliterated by the Death Star. We see his journey from random criminal to freedom fighter. Um, and even if on a much smaller scale, though there are many issues where people's lifetimes went by and the problem wasn't solved and they were still fighting for them, any work that you are doing in any kind of policy or advocacy or even like research, you will watch yourself spend a lot of effort on something that doesn't work,
Yeah.
at least in the interim. You know, states have legislative sessions at specific times. Sometimes that will mean a year goes by and the thing that you wanted didn't happen, and you expended a ton of effort to get it to happen. But it's really important to understand also what it means to build a foundation. Okay, that thing we did didn't work. But now all of the people who worked on that thing know each other's names and faces and email addresses. And the next time there's something we need to do, we can start talking. We know who not to trust. We know who our allies are. You know, keeping the ball rolling is important. It is how the work actually gets done.
And that's, I think, one of the things that I've talked in a couple different places about when it comes to cynicism is that in some ways, cynicism protects us. Cynicism is a tool by which we learn to tolerate failure because it is emotionally devastating to lose over and over again. And it is also an inevitable part of this struggle to do so. And by becoming cynical, by saying, well, we didn't have a chance in the first place, or this just happens, and whatever, we protect ourselves from the feeling of grief and loss when it was like, I thought this would work, and then it didn't. It's this layer of insulation. And it is a tool, it is a coping mechanism. And like any coping mechanism, it can rapidly become maladaptive and prevent you from fixing the thing that caused you to develop that coping mechanism in the first place. And so
Yeah,
cynicism
there's a
develops
big problem of people saying, I can't affect this problem, therefore I have no obligation to try to do anything,
precisely.
uh, which is actually wrong. I'm sorry to tell you, people, you have a lot of power in a non weird metaphysical sense, literally in the structures of your communities, finances, geographies, government officials. There are a lot of things that you can do to make changes, and
And you will
therefore you should.
and you'll also feel better doing it. As much as I talk about loss, there's no feeling like being around other people who care about this cause and are working towards it and experiencing that comradeship and struggling together to try to make your life better. Something I've talked about in a few places are two pieces of writing I really like, which is one is Picturing Power by Ariel Angel in Jewish Currents, where she talks about one of the main values of the airport protests during the Muslim ban in the first Trump administration was that as these large masses of people who did not have a lot of political experience felt themselves literally shut down an airport and stop deportations at a logistical level, they experience these first moments of, wait, I have power. And that is such a huge awakening in and of itself. And it is mobilizing, it is inspiring, and it also gives you that feeling of hope when you participate in struggle and feel that power. And I also talk about Blessed is the Flame, which is, the full title is Blessed is the Flame, an introduction to anarcho-nihilism and concentration camp resistance. I'm not an anarcho-nihilist, nor even an anarchist anymore, but I found that book really compelling. And I couldn't finish it because I have Holocaust survivors in the family. I'm Jewish. It was very challenging to get through. But something it does is it talks about, it presents all the ways that Nazis made resistance in the camps absolutely impossible. Just like all of these security measures and punitive measures and all of this. And the hardest I ever cried was it does that for a whole chapter and then does 3 pages of every time they succeeded at resisting anyway in some manner. All the ovens blown up, all the things that they did. And it still fundamentally kind of concludes in a way that is likely true. There was no internal resistance in that case that could have won. They simply, for all the resistance that did matter, they were not going to end that system from within. They were that disempowered. But the argument that it makes is that these people lived better for trying anyway, because to believe that they were resigned to this fate would have been to be dead already. And so the act of resisting, even if there was no chance of true victory, was worth it because it felt more human. It made you feel more human. And as much as I don't share that somewhat anarcho-nihilist perspective entirely, I was reading both of those like literally in the months leading up to working on this game, and I think they left a really a huge impact on me and on the game in terms of that idea that it is worth it for how it makes us feel. And like you said, when you remove yourself from these fights, you believe you have no power, and when you participate, you feel the power you have, and that is when you feel hopeful, and that is when you feel better.
It's it's a particular, when you compare this to some of its influences, like people may be attracted to something like Star Wars that has a big empire just because of the aesthetics and the fact that lightsabers are cool, all of which is true. Like it is really fun to think there are magical wizards out there, but what they're doing and what happens in A New Hope is a young man from a farm has violence done on his family by the state, and then
Yes.
gets into a bomber, which I'm not saying everyone should or needs to do, but the fact of the matter is the dynamic is the larger power structure. Most people are in a position where it is easier or benefits them to do nothing.
Yes.
It and many of the political realities that exist today are because of the efforts of small fringe groups that people said were weird. What do you mean? Our economy relies on slavery. Why would we get rid of it? You Quakers, you get out of here, you scamps.
Absolutely. And something I always try to I'm a little bit of an odd one out in this, I think, because I fundamentally think I think it is fundamentally important as leftists that we actually always appeal to self-interest. And I don't think that's a dirty word, and I don't think that's a bad thing. Because when we see our organizing as an act of charity, we lose that actual personal motivation and feeling and the thing about the work that feels especially good of knowing I'm struggling for my liberation. And when we understand that our liberation is actually bound up in the liberation of others, when we understand the interconnectedness of these systems of racism, of homophobia, of capitalism and class, we understand that actually fighting for the other is also fighting for myself. But
Yeah, I think there's a real problem in many people looking at leftist or liberal ideology to think or to frame it as you should do those things because they're nice or they will help other people. They will help you more than anything. If you have a stable, nonviolent, educated society with proper infrastructure where people have their needs met, that's good, that's productive, that will lead to good outcomes.
and specifically I like to think of it in terms of alienation, that like your life doesn't suck because you don't have a cheaper cheeseburger. Your life sucks because your job sucks. And because having to have every aspect of your life controlled by systems that you have no control over, your boss, your the whims of the market, all of that is deeply alienating, is a terrible experience. And when you talk about like there are many people who are in a position to benefit from doing nothing, in the same way that people talk about like privilege and people talk about like, oh, a revolution is going to involve a lot of people giving up a lot of things, especially if you're in the like imperial core in the first world. That's true. And those things that you give up are not what is making you happy. And you will also get rid of what is making you miserable. Those things that we are granted by the system are things to pacify us, to let us cope. And sure, under these systems, you might have less access to consumer goods. Your customer service may not be as good. And that's because those people's jobs won't suck. And your job won't suck because you will answer to yourself. You will answer to people who are working with you to make your lives better. And so I actually think it's very fundamentally important that when we talk about this work requiring sacrifice, and when we talk about this work, that we remember always that unless you are one of those deeply inhuman, insanely rich people at the very top who already get control over their own lives because they have all the money, you benefit from doing this. And if you find the right movement, the right organization, the right place to be and participate in that fight and participate for your own liberation, if you are unionizing your workplace, if you're developing a tenants union in the apartment building or housing complex that you rent, if you are involved in some form of collective act of solidarity that you share a stake in, you will feel better than you do if you don't do that.
And I realize I'm getting us off on a number of tangents that are still hopefully related to the game, in which you have to model a lot of these complicated issues and the motivations by different people, and the reason that even the characters themselves self-motivate.
So,
How is it that you decide what of those things will be themes of the game and what will actually be mechanics that you bring in with hard rules and text?
so luckily, Belonging Outside Belonging as a system is already very mechanically light. J Dragon has compared writing Belonging Outside Belonging games to poetry, because you have like one sentence to write a move, and if you add or subtract one adjective, it massively changes how it can be used to impact the story. Like the spy has a move, reveal a tool that you have is already on hand, concealed. You use the term reveal, which means you can't use this as a strong move if people already know that it's there, and it's concealed. So it can't be something that is like present unless you're hiding it. These little changes make big differences, and that allows me a lot of flexibility and makes me narrow my scope. But to think specifically about how I capture these motivations, it was in another recent interview that I sort of pieced together live that what makes a Going Rogue character, like a Going Rogue playbook, is less about how it solves problems and more about its motivations. So the 5 playbooks in the game are the spy, Cassian in the movie, Luthen in the show, the leveraged, Jin in the movie, Cassian in season 1. The leverage is defined by like someone is compelling them to participate in this liberation movement. They are holding something over them, like seeing their father again, their impounded ship, etc., are like lists of character options. The leveraged, the knight errant, who are someone who once served a cause and then left and is like feeling that pull to come back, and that's Bazin Chirrut in the movie. The convert, which is sort of the odd playbook out, that's Bodhi Rook, the pilot in the movie, who has just recently joined the Liberation and is like fresh-faced and naive and really believes this thing is going to make a difference. And the loyal, this is K2 in the movie, who feels so passionately dedicated to one other member of the party that they are in this fight also to stand by that person. And their bond is so big that it becomes a setting element. The bond between them is an element of the world that can act on the world. And for each of these playbooks, it's not really about their particular set of skills for blasting open that door or destroying that generator or sneaking into that place, that they have some of that. Each playbook has a move structure that is shared and has a number of like backstory prompts that are shared, but they each have 2 unique ones as well. And so the spy has one principle you abide by and one principle you've broken, and they have one thing you sacrificed and one thing you're fighting for. You select from the same list. And the leveraged has 2 principles that challenge even your cynicism, which is to say they're like very individualist stuff that can be made less individual. Like everyone deserves a chance to free themselves. can be Jin. The first thing she does in the movie, as bad as her character is kick the person who is trying to rescue her from prison, because she's like, it's all about me. It's all about me getting out of these situations. But if you learn to see other people as also deserving a chance to free themselves, if you universalize that thing, it becomes liberatory. Or children deserve a better world than, or a better childhood than I grew up with. All of these things that can come from the self and be extended. I could go on for each of the playbooks, but those custom questions really ask, what motivates your character? And so what I give to someone who's playing Going Rogue at a mechanical level is, here are the motivations that set you on a path. Select from this list. Select what speaks to you from this list. Here's where your characters are going to end up. Figure out how they get from point A to point B. And that's, I actually think, very important to the mechanics of the game and how it delivers the theme, because it is about figuring out also within yourself, here's what motivates me. Here's where I want to be. How do I get from point A to point B? How do I tolerate it? How do I change? How do I grow? And the way that is mechanically realized in the game, the way it assists you mechanically, is the piece of game design I am most proud of. So Belonging Outside Belonging games, and some Powered by the Apocalypse games, have a thing where you will ask a player to your left, answer this question so that we can define our character backstory together. It's not an individual. Something that frustrates me about D&D-like systems is like, I don't want to meet in a tavern. I want to know you, and I want to know why I know you and why I care about you. So you ask players to your left and right these questions. The base game of Galactic has 4 questions. Going Rogue has 3, for a very specific reason. They are a forced choice. One of those questions can introduce conflict between those characters, and 2 of those questions create the chance of connection. So there are questions like, why are you willing to give me a chance to prove myself? Or, what did I do that made you feel a fleeting sense of hope? And so, when you have 3 questions and have to pick 2, you have to see a possibility for connection, even if your characters don't actually like each other to start. And so I'm planting the seeds. And that's why I say that Going Rogue isn't compatible with Galactic. That's why it became its own game. Because you can't just drop Galactic playbooks in, because when you don't have those questions, I know this because I had a playtest that went horribly when we did that, because the characters just hated each other the entire campaign. It mechanically, very intentionally, in a way that does not tell you it's doing, forces you to plant those seeds of connection. And then each of the playbooks is very specifically designed to pull emotionally on the other playbooks. So, for example, The Spy is my baby. It was the first thing I wrote. I loved Cassian in Rogue One before the Andor show was even announced. I am #1, like, lesbians for Cassian Andor fan club. And The Spy is this person who is beginning to feel, I don't even know if we can succeed, or if we can, I don't know that I have a place in it. But I guess it's all I've been doing my entire life, so I have to keep doing it, or else the terrible things I've done weren't worth it. And Cassian says this in the hangar scene in Rogue One. And the Spy and the Convert are designed to pull on each other, because I needed that when I was writing it. The Spy sees in the Convert a younger version of themselves who joined the movement and thought, this is going to make so much of a difference. I'm going to do things that matter, and they're going to feel good. And they get to see through the Convert's eyes, through their younger self's eyes. The Convert, they're in for a rough realization that this work is messier and longer and sometimes more dispiriting than they realized. And the Spy is able to go, I don't want you to fall as hard as I had to fall. Let me let you down gentle so that you can understand the realities of this work without becoming as dispirited as I did. And so the way I've designed the motivations, the way I've designed the moves, is set up so these characters tug on each other. And neither is correct. Neither has the right perspective. They both have something the other needs. I needed the Spy I needed the Convert when I made this game. In fact, the Convert didn't exist in the first playtest, which went horrible. I had 3 playbooks in the start, the Knight Errant, the Leverage, and the Spy, and then I realized someone in the party has to show these characters that a different perspective is available. And pretty much any two playbooks in Going Rogue, I could tell you the tensions I've set up between them. The Knight Errant feels like, wow, I left because bad things happen. The Spy, why did you stay and do bad things? But also, oh man, I left and you didn't. You stayed committed. You kept trying. And that actually makes me feel a little bad. And then you get the vice versa story, Spy and Knight Errant. So all of these are designed super intentionally. I had a character I needed to see, and I needed to be, and I needed to experience. And it's been interesting in this last few months to realize I'm not that playbook anymore. I've felt challenged by my own game in a way that's almost been emotionally difficult. And I realized it's because I've been avoiding playing the Knight Errant, because I have since moved cities. The National Communist Organization that I was a part of fell apart due to internal disagreements. I felt very dispirited. And I realized I'm not the Spy anymore. I'm not pushing through. I'm the Knight Errant. I'm the person who left. And I haven't done it yet, but I'm like, I noticed that I was not playing the Knight Errant. I was playing every other playbook. And it's like, oh, that's because I don't want my game to push me. My game is designed to push me. It's designed to be a mirror. And I don't want that push. I'm like the Knight Errant, walking away from it and avoiding what is hurting me. And so I'm excited and terrified at some point to play it. And I know this sounds pretty highfalutin for something a tabletop game does, but at the very least for me, when I wrote it, that's what I wanted it to be able to do. And I hope it gets at least somewhat there for some people.
For anyone who does not want to avoid it anymore, let's conclude with some hard facts. The Kickstarter is going on now. It's going to be going on until June 30th. It is currently funded, but what are things people can expect from it, and what are the best places where people can look for more information?
Yeah, absolutely. So, we are crowdfunding a hardcover book that you can get for $40 that has both games. So you get two TTRPGs in one book. In fact, Going Rogue was the winner of the Best GM-less Game of the Year in 2023 Crit Awards. So it's two award-winning games, one book. You can also get what's called a book set for $65, which is the core book, Look Up to the Stars, which is a setting supplement where we're having 6 different authors, well, 6 if we get to our next stretch goal, write an in-fiction short story, so like a manifesto or a memo or a surveillance report about one of the pillars to show you this is how you turn a pillar into your own custom game world. You're not telling Star Wars. You're telling something better that you get to fix what you don't like, and you're going to get to see an author, a talented author, do that. And they'll, in fact, use the mechanics to pick desires. Every pillar has desires, and then write a short story that demonstrates how they turn that into a world. And you can use them as props if you want. Like you have an in-fiction document you can hand someone. And so let's Look Up to the Stars. It has Jason Morningstar, creator of Fiasco, like you mentioned earlier. It has Gita Jackson from Aftermath. Really great group of people that we've got on that. I have the High Ground, which is my 2-player dueling game of banter, posturing, and capes, where you're like telling the pre-battle banter using fencing-inspired rock, paper, scissors mechanics. I won't go over the whole thing. It's on the page. So you can get all 3 of those books for $65. The Eye of the High Ground, it's a color cover from the illustrator for Going Rogue. So it's like a new cover that will only be available during the crowdfunder. So you get this like exclusive full color cover. It's usually black and white. And then at 90, you can get a box set, which is, I think, the sort of best version of the game. You get all those books, and you get 25 metal tokens that we've engraved with icons representing both games, like a fist and a raised blaster and like clasping hands. So 25 metal tokens for the token system, 2d6 with those same icons, a deck of 44 cards that have NPC traits on them, so you can randomly create NPCs by dealing them out. Playmats that have the pillars on them so that you can just like set them on the table and attach tokens to them. Yeah, I'm really excited about the design of the box set. You can get that there, and it runs through the end of this month. Our next stretch goal adds 2 more authors to Look Up to the Stars, and then after that, we'll be trying to do a print run of the Scum and Villains expansion, which is it is something I already released for the previous editions that is like very Mandalorian and Solo and Book of Boba Fett inspired, where you're playing like space criminals, and it like adds that into Galactic. So if we can hit that 100K, there will also be an add-on option for a like space criminals inspired expansion. And I think that is the bulk of it. Oh, I'll mention that if you want to hear these games played, head on over to either the One Shot podcast, where Austin Walker of A More Civilized Age and Friends at the Table, and Natalie Watson and more play an actual play of Going Rogue, and then on Party of One with Jeff Stormer and Ife Nwadiwe from Dimension 20, play Galactic on there, so you can hear the games and see if it's something that you might like. I got to do sound design for it, which was very fun. And that I feel. Oh, yes, I just wanted to say, hi, are you a Gamingtrend viewer who's watching this video and has watched it all the way to the end? If you back it, go ahead and send me a message. I'm Jumpgate Games. So if you message the Jumpgate Games Kickstarter account, if you back it, message me and say, let's see, what's our code phrase? It's going to be, to steal a couple different things, it's going to be, we have trends everywhere. Which is very silly, but I did that off the cuff. I forgot to come up with the code phrase. Anyway, what this code phrase does is I will send you a free PDF copy of the previous editions of the games, Galactic 2E and Going Rogue 2E, that you can have right now. If you back the crowdfunder, send that code phrase to me, and I'll shoot you those itch.io codes.
All right, people, join the movement, drop the trends. Jess, thank you so much for joining us today.
Can I add one last comment?
Seeing this, go right ahead. Yeah.
I'm sorry to push the time. I think we talked very briefly. You said in the beginning about how you market and how these politics go beyond marketing. I have been super intentional everywhere to never use language like join the movement, because I never want to pose buying my game as an act of political resistance. Literally, our like video editor, I didn't give them text for the final call to action at the end of the trailer, and so they put like support the rebellion or support the liberation, back us on Kickstarter today. And I was like, can you change that to together we can do this, which is a little more like accurate to, it is true, it is what we're doing, it's suggestive of the theme, but it isn't saying what we're doing is political resistance. And I'm sorry, I hope this isn't like overly critical, because I don't think there's, especially for not someone who is selling it for your personal benefit, there's nothing wrong with like going thematic like there, but it is so important to me that I personally never tell anyone, spend money on my work, it's politics. That's not what Going Rogue is. And I feel very committed that if I'm going to make a game that I frame as so political, I'm responsible in how I market it to not use that in a way that is not due. And I wanted to talk about it from the very beginning when you said, how do you do politics beyond marketing for these games? And I forgot to bring it up until you said that, and I was like, oh, that reminds me of an anecdote.
It is particularly salient because you look at Star Wars, the most popular big anti-fascist thing is owned by a giant company that is ultimately only doing what they're doing for the sake of profit, and it's a tension that is important for people to keep in mind.
And Disney Plus is on the BDS priority target list. And so we actually have a BDS statement on the crowdfunder. We have committed to anywhere we mention Star Wars, we include our BDS statement saying we do not support or condone purchasing Disney Plus subscriptions to watch Andor or any other Star Wars, because there's nothing more important than actual real life solidarity with liberation movements. And so, yeah, it is a very weird tension for like that Andor to have the politics that it does, and also be on only available in a place that requires breaking the BDS list to legally engage with. So
we leave you, the audience, to educate yourself, make your own determinations, and we'll have more information on all of this in the description below.
Thank you so much for having me. This was really fun. Thank you for letting me push the time at the last moment. This was your own work and the perspective you have let me have a deeper conversation about this and bounce off it in a way I really appreciate.